Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Syria's new leaders have inherited an economy in ruins. So how can they rebuild the nation, and who will foot the bill? Ukraine has halted Russia's gas flows to Europe, but who does the decision hurt most? Moscow, Kyiv, or European nations? And sales of foreign smartphones have almost halved in China. Apple is the main loser. So have Chinese consumers lost their taste for iPhones? After almost 14 years of civil war, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad has gone, but the nation's economy has been decimated. Most of its oil and gas wells, roads, electricity grid, farmland and infrastructure are damaged. Crippling the economy even further is a wide range of Western sanctions imposed on the nation and on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the main group that overthrew al-Assad and is now leading Syria's transition. Those measures prevented Assad's government from doing business with other nations and private companies. They've also hampered the delivery of much-needed aid. The new administration says that lifting those sanctions is vital to help rebuild the country. But will they ever be removed? We'll discuss that with our guest shortly. But first, a report from Fintan Monaghan.
With the fall of the Assad government, Syrians are hoping for a new beginning. But reviving the economy will be a serious challenge. More than a decade of war has devastated the economy. GDP has fallen 85% since 2011. Infrastructure lies in ruins. Electricity, transport and health services will need to be rebuilt. 90% of the population lives below the poverty line. Unemployment is high and inflation has left most people struggling to get by. The new Syrian administration under Ahmed al-Shara is taking action on the economy. It's raised public sector salaries by 400% and taken steps to stabilize the local currency. In the past, oil provided a quarter of Syria's public revenue. Reviving this could be key to recovery.
If it were possible to revitalize the energy sector, it would not only help address power shortages within Syria, but it would provide the government with a much stronger revenue stream that it could then put to use, rebuilding capacity for industry to recover.
But reconstruction will be impossible so long as international sanctions remain in place. The new administration is making a diplomatic push to get them lifted, saying they shouldn't be punished for the crimes of the Assad era.
The most important thing is to remove the restrictions so that countries and companies can start high-level investments, especially in heavy industry, energy, oil and other things. If the sanctions remain for a long time, or if they're not frozen, I think that a catastrophe will hit the Syrian people.
Gulf states and Turkey have been sending aid to Syria, and the US has relaxed some restrictions on humanitarian supplies. But Western governments are cautious. Many include the leaders of the new administration on their list of terrorists. They've signaled that sanctions won't be lifted until it shows it will protect minorities and share power.
I have made it clear that the political process is closely linked to the economic reconstruction process, especially for our European constitutional stance with regard to sanctions and reconstruction through financial support.
Syria has entered a new era, but the road to recovery is uncertain and is likely to be a long one. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Sinan Hatatet is a non-resident senior fellow for the Syria Project at the Atlantic Council. He specializes in political and war economies, especially within Syria, and he joins us now from the Syrian capital, Damascus, where the internet is still a bit patchy at times. Sinan, good to have you with us. So what is the current state of the Syrian economy right now?
Yeah, so let's remember this is a country that came out from after 14 years of bloody war that was already raised by corruption and going through a privatization stage. Today we are speaking about nearly 90% of the population is living below the poverty line and unemployment rates exceeding 50%. And productive sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing have shrunk by nearly 60% compared to pre-war levels. the sheer volume of destruction is estimated at as high as $200 billion. Some estimates goes even higher than that. The reconstruction of the country would cost around at least $30 billion.
So how much are sanctions crippling the economy right now?
Well, the sanctions does count for a lot, especially the sanctions on the banking sector and the energy sector. This was a very efficient instrument in crippling the Syrian economy before the topple down of Bashar al-Assad. But now it is also crippling the capacity of the Syrian people to uplift themselves. We estimate that without the lifting of sanctions, it would take at least 3 times, if not more, to recuperate and to be able to produce again. This is crucial in order to bring in raw material from the international markets, and also crucial for private sector to engage into the local economy. Without this private sector's international one, whether it is regional or owned by Syrian diaspora abroad, also the public sector won't be able to fend for the Syrian people.
Now, Syria's finance minister has said that the government is going to hike the pay of public sector workers by as much as 400% next month. Can the new government afford to do that?
Not without laying off people. And around 25% of the Syrian population is working at the private sector. Around 40 to 60% of the state expenditure goes to financing salaries of the public sector. So if they do not have financial help from other countries in the region, specifically Qatar or Turkey or Saudi Arabia even, they won't be able to afford it.
2 of the main pillars, Sinan, of the Syrian economy are, of course, oil and agriculture. But the oil fields under control of the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, the nation obviously deprived of a main source of income. Are there any other sectors in which the government can invest to kickstart the economy and make up for that shortfall?
Well, production in Syrian manufacturers used to have a very good reputation before 2011. 60% of the Syrian economy was responsible and was basically the results of SMEs working in trade, in manufacturing, as well as in logistics. Syria remains a very important transportation hub in the region of East Mediterranean basin, and it can leverage this position again. But it also needs consistent investment in roads, in energy in order to pick up manufacturing again. And there is also a lot of work and efforts needed to upgrade the workforce, to build their capacity again. They have been deprived for the last 14 years from learning the new trades in the world, and this will take time.
How much is reconstruction going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? And how quickly can Syria's economy get back on its feet?
The most optimistic estimates say around 10 to 15 years to have it to pre-2011 status, which wasn't great in the first place. I think we still have at least 2 or 3 decades till we see Syria fulfilling its full potential. The construction, just physical one, costs around $30 billion. That doesn't account the cost of training new workforces, the cost of bringing back refugees from Turkey, from Europe, from other regional also host countries. And Syrians alone won't be able to fund this. The international community needs to invest if they want to see the stabilization of the country and the region at large. Obviously, the rich Arab Gulf countries are the first to be expected to chip in, but also Europe should be participating actively if they want also Syria to be part of a larger conglomerate of countries that is participating in the security of the Mediterranean.
Sinan, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
My pleasure.
It was the last major Russian gas route to Europe. A pipeline passing through Ukraine has recently run dry. Kyiv has refused to renew a transit deal after it expired last week. Now, Europe has already significantly cut Moscow's share of its gas imports following the latter's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. While the decision does deprive Russia of some of its gas revenue, Kyiv is also set to lose millions of dollars in transit fees, and the impact of that halt could ripple through Europe's energy sector, as Alex Baird reports.
Russia had long been one of Europe's biggest gas suppliers, but the war in Ukraine has reduced those imports to a fraction of what they once were. Now, a 5-year deal between Russia and Ukraine has expired, shutting off a key pipeline into the European Union.
We were always in favour of gas supplies, of the supplies being above politics, of them being purely economic matters. We never said no to supplies to Europe.
The deal was worth almost $1 billion to Ukraine last year, but it says those payments have helped the Russian war effort. Russia is now expected to lose $5 billion in annual revenue. Slovakia is one of several EU members unhappy about the move. Its Prime Minister Robert Fico visited Moscow in December. Slovakia relied on gas imports via Ukraine and made money from transit fees. Finding alternate routes may be costly. Outside the EU, Moldova is worst affected. It's been forced to impose a 60-day state of emergency in its energy sector. Before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, it was the biggest supplier of gas to the EU, providing more than 40% in 2021. But since reducing its dependency after that invasion, the EU imported just 8% in 2023.
There are alternatives, but they tend to be a bit more expensive than the Russian pipeline gas. The impact will be felt especially in Austria, in Hungary and Slovakia, where the price of gas will likely rise. And this could have an impact on consumer prices, on the cost of living, but also on prices for industry.
Most Russian gas routes to Europe are shut, including the Nord Stream 2 pipeline under the Baltic that was blown up in 2022. But the shutdown of the pipeline through Ukraine won't stop Russian gas from entering Europe. The Turk Stream pipeline is still operational, supplying gas first to Turkey, then to Hungary and Serbia. And imports of Russian liquefied natural gas to the EU reached record highs last year, raising questions about the effectiveness of sanctions on Russia that are designed to limit funding for its war in Ukraine. Alex Baird, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, to discuss all of this, we're joined now from Oxford in the UK by Jack Sharpless. He's a senior research fellow at the Natural Gas Research Programme at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. Jack, good to have you with us. So why exactly has Ukraine refused to renew this agreement that allowed the transit of Russian gas across its territory to Europe?
So I think this is a calculation on the part of the Ukrainians that, as your previous report mentioned, that although Ukraine will lose money from the end of transit, they want to deny Russia any revenues that can be used, obviously, to fund their continuing war in Ukraine.
All right, so how damaging will this be to Russia? How much money is it going to lose that it won't be put towards its war, able to put towards its war effort?
So this is really in two parts. Firstly, it concerns the tax revenues that go to the Russian federal budget. The oil and gas sector in Russia as a whole accounts for about a third of Russia's federal budget revenues. Of that, about 20% is derived from the gas sector and 80% from the oil sector. And those gas sector revenues are split between a tax on gas as it's produced in Russia, they're called mineral extraction tax or royalties, and a customs duty on the export of that gas to Europe, which is levied at about 30% of the value of that export. So from a Ukrainian perspective, for every cubic meter less that Russia produces and then delivers to Europe, that's less money going into the Russian federal budget.
So who has most to lose here, Russia or Ukraine? Some estimates reckon that Ukraine's going to lose something like $800 million a year in transit fees. Can Ukraine afford to lose that money?
That's an excellent question. So from the Russian perspective, what they're going to lose is relatively small compared to the size of their economy and the size of the federal budget. From the Ukrainian perspective, where the economy is already facing extremely challenging conditions as a result of the war, this is money that they can ill afford to lose. But clearly this is a strategic calculation that they've made. And I think the Ukrainian Energy Ministry, the Ukrainian government see Ukraine's energy future, as it were, as being part of the integrated European gas market rather than as a conduit for Russian gas. So they've already started to develop a business case encouraging European gas market participants to use Ukrainian underground gas storage, to use the territory of Western Ukraine to deliver gas from sort of north to south, from one part of the EU to the other. So they're developing a different business model. But obviously that is, in a time of war, extremely challenging to do.
Europe has been trying to wean itself off Russian gas for quite some time now, since the invasion of Ukraine. Has it succeeded in doing that? Are there going to be European nations that will be hurt by this move, and at what cost?
So I think Europe has been extraordinarily successful at coping with the loss of Russian gas, particularly the Russian pipeline gas that was coming into the European market prior to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Europe has coped in two ways. Partly by reducing overall gas consumption, which has fallen by about a fifth between 2021 and 2023, and then fallen slightly again in 2024. And the other thing that Europe has done is gone out into the global LNG market and secured alternative supplies. We've been very lucky that conditions were somewhat favourable for doing so in 2022 and 2023, and those imports fell back a bit in 2024. I would anticipate them to rise again in 2025. So Europe has managed, in terms of the effect of particularly Ukrainian transit, it is, as your earlier report highlighted, predominantly going to affect Central European countries. There, I think it's less a question of any threat of physical shortage and more just an impact on prices. Those countries are well connected to their neighbours within the EU. They can import gas across the border, for example, from Germany into the Czech Republic and Austria and Slovakia, and from Italy into Austria. And those countries in Central Europe also have quite substantial seasonal gas storage stocks relative to the size of their market. So there's no danger of going physically short over the winter, but it is just pushing prices up a little bit and keeping them at their current high level and keeping the market that little bit tighter.
Does this move, though, bring to an end Russia's once dominance of the EU energy market?
Yes, I think it does. I think this is another milestone on that journey. If you consider that Russian gas pipeline gas supplies to Europe peaked in 2019 at just shy of 180 billion cubic meters. Last year, they were 30 billion cubic meters. And with the end of this transit via Ukraine in 2025, we would anticipate it to be around 15 billion cubic meters. So this is an absolutely huge decline in Russian pipeline gas supply to Europe, a decline of over 90% in the space of a few short years. So I think this does really almost bring to a close the era of Russian pipeline gas in Europe. We do still have Russian pipeline gas coming into southeastern Europe via the Turkish Stream pipeline up through Bulgaria to Greece, onward to Serbia and up as far as Hungary. But that's really now the extent of that market. It's a regional, localized Southeast European affair.
Jack, it's been really good to talk to you today on Counting the Cost. Many thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Angola's government says that it will continue with its plans to remove fuel subsidies by the end of 2025. Politicians say that removing subsidies will free up money for essential public services like transport, health and education. But the move is unpopular, as Haru Matassa reports from Luanda.
Carlos Dos Santos is a high school teacher in Angola. His salary isn't enough to ensure he can pay all his monthly bills, but he says government fuel subsidies help cushion consumers from rising prices. And that's why he is worried about politicians' plans to scrap them.
It will hit our pockets. Once the fuel subsidies are removed, prices of everything will go up. It will hurt us badly.
Right now, Angolans pay about 35 cents for a litre of petrol and about 21 cents for diesel. Removing subsidies means they will pay more at the pump. Life is already a struggle for many Angolans. Kenneth Folochi left the country in 1980 during the Civil War. He came back in 2003, a year after the war ended. He says few people benefit from the country's vast oil wealth.
surviving in Angola is hard, or is a sacrifice because of there is no work. There is no work wherever we go. That they say Angola have got no work.
Angola is Africa's second largest producer of crude oil. Some economists say that's a problem.
We are too dependent on oil. The oil, they account for 99% of our exports, 30% of the GDP, and about 60% of the public income. So when the oil is good, Angola is good. When the oil is bad, Angola is bad. But now it's not only the price who affects Angola, because our production is decreasing.
When fuel prices nearly doubled in 2023, people protested in the capital, Luanda. Police say at least 5 were killed in the unrest. Protests against plans to remove subsidies have also been held in other African countries, such as Nigeria. Many African countries are in debt, and there's pressure on developing countries from bodies like the International Monetary Fund to cut public spending and introduce economic policies that commonly prove tough for people already suffering poverty and financial difficulty. Oil has helped Angola grow its economy. In the capital, there is a lot of development. New buildings keep going up. Those over there, some of them are oil companies and other businesses, but many people here are still poor. This is one of the world's most unequal economies. More than half of people aged under 25 are jobless, and for all those facing hardship, removing fuel subsidies won't be popular. Hayat Tahrir, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Now, China is the world's largest smartphone market, and foreign brands have long enjoyed strong sales in the nation. But local manufacturers have stepped up the competition of late. A strong challenger is Huawei with its homegrown operating system, and it appears to be posing serious challenges, mainly to the US firm Apple. The tech giant's battle to keep its iPhone popular in the Chinese market is now getting even tougher. Well, the government-backed China Academy of Information and Communications Technology says that foreign smartphone shipments dropped by almost half in November. Apple accounts for the majority of foreign mobile phone shipments in China. Other competitors like Samsung control only a tiny fraction of the market there. The company aims to accelerate the rollout of its new generative AI features to iPhones in China to try to regain its footing there. And it's offered discounts to attract Chinese shoppers ahead of the Lunar New Year. The firm has reduced the price of its latest handsets by up to $70. Chinese phone maker Huawei has also cut prices by as much as 20%. China will expand consumption subsidies to cover smartphones and other electronics in a bid to encourage domestic spending and to offset the effects of any new US tariffs on its exports. Well, Will Wong is a senior research manager at IDC, a global market intelligence and data firm where he covers the mobile phone market. He joins us now from Singapore. Good to have you with us, Will. So why have sales of foreign phones in particular fallen so sharply in China?
Yeah, so first thing, for the foreign brands in China, like what you have mentioned just now, is majorly accounted by Apple. So Samsung is over there as well, but Apple accounted for a major share over there. It has been in the top 5 for a long time. So when we talk about foreign brands in China, we talk about Apple itself. So why is facing all those challenges? So what we see is that there are mostly external factors, external challenges. So first thing is consumers. Consumers in China have changed. So their formal sentiment is not as strong as before, especially comparing with pre-COVID situations, pre-COVID times. So formal fear of missing out sentiment is not that strong anymore. So they're more cautious right now in spending. They're more price conscious right now in their shopping, especially for the high-end products. So that's one thing. Another thing is about the competitions. So we see competitions from Huawei and other Chinese OEMs as well. They are introducing more products like, for example, foldable phones and also like AI features in China. This is creating social buzz and really attracting those consumers in China. So when they're creating this kind of social buzz, it's easily attracting those consumers who are more price conscious and looking for value in China. But what we see is that Apple, they're still having a strong customer stickiness over there. So that strong customer stickiness is actually supporting the performance of Apple. But if we look at overall pictures, consumers has changed, and also the competition is really affecting Apple in China locally.
So this is down to consumer preference. What does Apple then need to do to regain its foothold? It's still in the top 5 in China. I mean, it has at times slipped out, but what does it need to do to regain consumer preference, to win back consumers in China?
Yeah, it needs to create more wow factors. So right now, what we all looking at is AI. But when it comes to AI, when it comes to China, it needs approval from Chinese government as well. And that is not easy things right now, especially since there's a US-China tensions over there. So it's not easy things. So if Apple can't really create wow factors from the AI factors, from the AI features, another things it can focus on is creating wow factors from the hardware perspective. So from the hardware perspective and from AI, this is something that Apple can look at it, which is, in summary, is creating wow factors to attract consumers, to make them keep spending.
Apple has offered discounts on its products, but China has recently decided to subsidize homegrown smartphones and other electronics. I mean, is that going to put further pressure on Apple in particular? As you say, Samsung isn't really affected here because its market share is so small. But is that going to affect Apple?
We see that the impact will be limited. So first thing, these subsidies is short terms. So in terms of the impact and in terms of the time period it will bring the impact will be limited in terms of the time period. So second thing is that these subsidies is only available in certain provinces or in certain cities. So in terms of scale, it will be limited as well. And if we come to Apple consumers usually is in the high end. They're high-end consumers. But we have to look at it is that consumers in China right now, even in the high end, they're looking for a discount as well. So even though it's limited, the impact from the subsidies, the overall economic situation's impact is larger.
Well, it's been great to talk to you. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Apple's Siri could be listening to users without their consent. Apple's agreed to pay $95 million to settle a court case alleging that its voice-activated assistant violated users' privacy. iPhone owners complained that the voice recordings were shared with third parties, including advertisers. The tech firm has denied any wrongdoing in the preliminary settlement filed in the Oakland, California federal court. And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at @afinnegan on X. Try to remember to use the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us a line. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire editions for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the team here in Doha. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.